So our next speaker is Sree Gopal. Sree is originally from Chennai, India, but now calls San Diego home. She completed her PhD in bioengineering and worked in the pharma industry for a decade. Her passion for impacting the ocean-climate interface is what pivoted her to the MAS-MBC program. She feels fortunate to have had the opportunity to attend COP26, which is UN's Global Climate Summit, and then to work on a capstone project that has local impact during her time here. She hopes to continue her work on coastal issues and policy for the next step in her career. I do remember sitting down early in the summer with Sree and talking about, she came to the program because she was very driven to find solutions to climate change, especially as related to the ocean, and was so excited about international solutions and really high-level solutions, which are absolutely important. And she went to sort of investigate and observe when she went to Scotland for COP. I will say I took quiet, probably not so subtle, but absolute pleasure when she sort of steered for her project towards something that was really local and really aimed at local solutions and local agencies and local action. Because I also think that it's not either or, it's both and, but that is also so very important in tackling climate change challenges that we face on our planet. So the name of Sree's project is Shifting Sands, using a sediment budget model to predict beach width changes for Cardiff State Beach.
Thank you, Samantha, for the introduction. So here is a beach in Encinitas, California. It's about 10 meters wide with barely enough dry sand to lay your towel down on a warm day. This is also a beach in Encinitas, but it's about 50 meters wide with gently sloping sands. There's a couple of kelp beds here to lure divers, and there are two reefs here that create fantastic surf breaks. This is Cardiff State Beach. And if we were to pick between one of these two beaches for our summer getaway, I'm sure most of us would pick the wider, nicer looking Cardiff State Beach. So Cardiff hasn't always looked like this, right? In the 1930s, it was a much narrower strip of sand, a lot like this beach on the left here. But since then, we've had coastal development in the form of Highway 101 that you see on the right side, and a lot of human intervention in the form of added sand that's been placed on this beach to widen it. So a wider beach is not just important for recreation, it's also a really important buffer to protect that highway from that ocean right there. So now consider, what could happen to this beach in the future, right? With climate change exacerbating coastal erosion and sea level rise, right? So UCSD, for instance, if this coastal highway were to get flooded, we would have access issues getting in, right? So how can individuals and coastal managers best equip themselves with knowledge going forward? And this is where my capstone comes in. So the goal for me was to predict beach width in the future for the next 30 years for Cardiff State Beach or CSB using a sediment budget model, budget meaning inflows and outflows of sediment into the system. I then validated this model, and I also incorporated synergy with living shoreline dunes, which are coastal resilience features that are present on this beach. I'll talk about this in a little bit later. And as I mentioned, the reason that this work was important and timely was because beach width and just beach profiles in general have a lot of impact on coastal infrastructure, recreation, protecting coastal ecosystems, property, and they are critical to inform coastal management decisions in a data-driven manner. Like, should we add more sand to this beach? What does it take for the highway to be protected from severe coastal events? And there are many stakeholders here that are invested and really want to know answers to these questions. There's the city of Encinitas itself. There is SANDAG, which is the San Diego Association of Governments. There's the Nature Collective. There's the California Department of Parks and Recreation, just to name a few. For today, I'll focus on a few key beach width projections using this model, and I'll talk about what those implications are for coastal management. The model itself is formulated based on over 20 years of extensive data that have been collected by the Scripps team here and by SANDAG. This is the Cardiff State Beach north-south extent. It's a measure of what the beach width changes look like based on 5 key elements that feed into it. Number 1 is bypassing. So there is a lagoon inlet right in the top of the beach that you see there. And the flow of the sand normally is from north to south. And because this inlet is fixed right there, that flow gets interrupted and fills up the inlet. So bypassing refers to dredging that inlet and taking that sand and putting that on the beach. It's really a win-win sort of a situation because now the inlet has access to the tidal circulation and now the beach has more sand. So bypassing is incredibly important, and this is what a picture of it looks like. You can see these big pipes carrying the dredged material. You might have seen these as you drive by 101. It's fairly common. The second piece that brings in sand into the system is nourishment, which is where you bring in sand from elsewhere, like the San Diego Bay, or from other offshore areas, and you put that on the beach. And look at this picture. This is a huge nourishment operation in Encinitas, 300,000 cubic yards of sand. The bulldozers are flattening that along the beach. And this is really important in a lot of the coastal management conversations. Nourishment is big and it's expensive. The third piece, these are the living shoreline dunes that are present on the beach. They're a pilot coastal resilient feature that's a hybrid dune structure that has native vegetation on it. The purpose is to serve as a buffer against coastal erosion and also to serve as a habitat for native ecosystems, right? For this particular beach, the living shoreline dunes also serve as sand storage devices, and that's going to be an important source of sand for the beach as well. This is a picture of the dunes themselves right here. The fourth piece is sea level rise, and you might have heard earlier how that is expected to impact beach width, reduce beach width, which is why it's in red there. This is a picture of a coastal flooding event and coastal erosion that's expected to exacerbate with increasing sea levels. And the last piece is the El Nino seasonal oscillation. El Nino is a climate pattern, and for our beach, what happens during an El Nino is that it really makes those winter erosions a lot worse. So if you see this beach here, it once had sand before the El Nino, but once the El Nino year has happened, most of this is just rocks and erosion following an El Nino. So all of these 5 factors are combined into the sediment budget equation that kind of helps us estimate what this change in beach width is going to be in the next 30 years. Combine the model with data sets, starting from the 1990s. And this picture you see is the south is here and north, ocean on top, land below. These are data lines, data transects. That the red lines are the Scripps collection lines. There are 20 of them. There are 2 black lines that represent the Sandak collection line. That happens twice a year. The Scripps collection is a lot more frequent. There's quarterly and monthly surveys as well. And the way that the data are collected by the Scripps team is using these jumbo survey methods that include a jet ski, pretty cool, huh? And there is a dolly there, and there is a survey ATV, and the data are composited into this multivariate data format, and that I've been fortunate enough to access and use to create this model. And this goes all the way from the back of the beach to about 10-meter depth of water, so really like extensive cross-shore data sets. So how do we know this model is reliable? How do we have confidence in this model? We validate it with known data sets. So basically, what we did was we did a hindcast approach to see what the predictions would have looked like in the past, compare that with available data sets. And the y-axis here shows the change in beach width, and the x-axis is the time. This is from 2000 to 2020. The Sandak data sets are shown in black. The SIO data sets are shown in red, and our predictions are in purple. So all in all, it's very promising that all of these 3 line up with each other. Especially interesting to us was that the Sandak and the Scripps data sets, even though they were so different in frequency and locations, they still managed to follow those dips and valleys that we see there. So this is great news. Now we can, this gives us additional confidence that our model might work for this system. I just want to give a sneak peek at the results before diving right in. The first one that I want all of us to take away from today is that bypassing really works in this system. Frequently, a lot of conversations and hype around beach widths is around on nourishment, right? There is a lot of those conversations, but something as steady, routine, and somewhat mundane as bypassing has a significant role to play in our system. The second piece is that there is an interplay of sand between the dunes and the beach, and the dunes serve an important role in keeping the beach stable. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the third piece is that in the absence of human intervention, this beach just doesn't really stand much of a chance because El Niños and sea level rise will take a toll and reduce your beach width. Let's jump in. So this graph shows change in beach width again on the y-axis and the year projection on the x-axis. The blue bars are where we assume a severe El Niño event is going to occur, and we can move that around and get slightly different projections. But overall, this is business as usual, yearly bypass. It tells you that the projections look promising. This was interesting to see that even with the routine just bypass alone, the beach is almost 20 meter wider by 2050. So that's good news for the beach. The second scenario that I considered was, what if we only have half the amount of sand to supply to the beach? And that turned out to be a hold the line scenario, wherein the beach width, you kind of keep it stable around the zero thing, and it just goes up and down. So the sawtooth pattern that you see there, especially the drops, you can see that happen with the El Niño, with each of these projections. And that's in alignment with what we expect. The third case that we considered was the no bypass case, where you don't intervene at all. You just let everything else take a toll. And at the end of those 30 years, the beach is down by half its current size. So this is something to keep in mind as we move forward. So speaking of bypassing and sand supply, this is a picture of the dunes, the living shoreline dunes from January 2021 after an erosive, energetic winter storm, where the waves kind of carved out a whole bunch of storm and exposed the dunes and exposed the cobble berm below. So in this year, bypassing was used to repair the dune toe. So the question for coastal managers is, what would future placement of bypass sand look like? Do we want to divert some to the beach, some to the dune? What do those decisions look like? And the second is that the dunes are incredibly important for this beach. They also serve as sand sources. So as a pilot project in coastal resilience, the data set that we created are going to be really helpful to inform adaptive management decisions for the dunes, which has a lot of interested stakeholders involved. So this is an important piece of research that needs to be elaborated further. The third piece of my results really center around sea level rise. This is a picture for what the projections look like for California. Like 1970 to 2020 is the actual rise itself. And beyond that is multiple scenarios that have been considered. So for my presentation today, I'll be talking about the low and the high scenario. The low is the bottommost, and that's about a 0.3 meter increase by 2100. And the high scenario is a 2 meter increase by 2100 and a corresponding 0.4 meter increase by 2050. So these two are sort of the extreme scenarios that we're going to talk about today. So in the low scenario, this is very similar to what you saw earlier with the El Niños and the sawtooth pattern for beach with change. With the low scenario, the blue line that you see in the bottom is the contribution of sea level rise to beach width loss. So that's about 5 meters or like 15% of the overall beach width, which is fairly manageable and modest. And the variability is also really tight because that scenario, that's the variability from the uncertainty in the sea level rise itself. But as you move to the other extreme, now sea level rise actually rules this equation because the loss in beach width that you see is 15 meters, and it's almost 50% of the overall net beach width change. So, and the variability is also a lot higher. So the reality is probably going to be somewhere in between. We don't really know what to expect, but it is important to consider each of these two scenarios while we make coastal management decisions. So in conclusion, what we learned for this system was that consistent bypassing was really the backbone of stabilizing or even increasing the beach width in the next 30 years. And in the absence of human intervention, the beach width reduces by half. It's about 50 meters now, so the projections tell us that it could become like 25 meters in the future in 30 years. Not a desirable scenario. But that's where this part comes in. Stakeholder engagement is really important for this sort of a multifactorial project. And that's really the key next step for where I want to go with this. It's disseminating this information, bringing in people for discussions. We had 10 weeks to barely just touch the tip of this iceberg, and there are many elements that I haven't factored into this, but hopefully we can build on this as we go along. With that, I want to thank my Capstone committee, Mark, Bill, Nick. Thank you so much, not just for your guidance and input, but for your true enthusiasm for this project. This is really great, and I couldn't have come this far without your support. To the CPG group and to everyone else for providing data and support. To my friends here, my family here, thank you all for being here. Thank you. Questions?
Hi, Sree.
Hi.
There's been some rumors about shifting the highway inland a bit, and there's also been a lot of wetland restoration just adjacent to that beach. So I'm curious of what your thoughts are on that based on your research.
That's a loaded question, but I can definitely speak to the. The San Elijo Lagoon has been undergoing an extensive restoration project since 2017. Is Doug in the audience? But so there is. Another Doug Gibson. But so there is an extensive restoration project that the San Elijo Lagoon has been undergoing, and a lot of the sand dredged from that has come into Cardiff as well, another 300,000 cubic yards in the last couple of years. So that's definitely going to be an important factor in the future as well. I haven't heard as much about the highway getting relocated inland, but those are really complex conversations because managed retreat is somewhat of a really controversial and really difficult realm. And a lot of people look to sand manipulation as a much preferred alternative, or at least buying us time before we have to think about other alternatives. So I don't have an answer to that, but it's definitely an important conversation, and it is complicated. Yeah, thanks.
I have a quick question for you. As a resident of Encinitas, and also a lobbyist, and I hear a lot of whining from Oceanside and Del Mar. So everyone from this region knows that what you're talking about in Encinitas and the San Elijo Lagoon, which I live right off of, that Manchester exit, that's being handled well, like what you're talking about, super informative. I know you only had a couple weeks to work on this, but do you have any plans on sharing this information with the other cities on the north and south access here? Because Oceanside is crazed about getting more sand on the beach and it is irritating Encinitas, and Del Mar community is going crazy over the train. So like all of these issues are all interconnected, and I'm wondering if you're interested in connecting with those elected officials, or if you're kind of like, here's my research and leave me alone.
No, definitely the former. I think the whole point of this research is to connect all these different entities and to work together, because this is not an isolated coastline that we're talking about. But as part of that, one of the next steps would be to maybe share this at the Sandag Shoreline Preservation Working Group, of which all of these other cities are part of, right? So I think people need to see this work so we can decide what we want to do next, right, with this. That said, the model that we have here is definitely suited for Cardiff. Extrapolating that to other locations will need further research, because not all of the beaches are accreting beaches as Cardiff is. There may be beaches that erode naturally a lot more than Cardiff does. Yeah, thanks.
We have one more here.
Yes.
Hi, if there's a beach without a bypass, is there another alternative?
If we don't do bypass,
No, if you don't, you can only do a bypass, you said, when there is that the lagoon
yeah.
going out there. So if that isn't happening, is there another way to do it without digging up sand from the ocean or something to replenish the beaches? Or
Yeah. So that's been done pretty frequently for this beach. The nourishment itself has been done at least 3 times in the past 20 years. And that's definitely a viable alternative, but it's a little bit more expensive. It costs about $25 per cubic meter, as opposed to the bypassing, which is only about 5. So there is a cost-benefit consideration there too, but definitely an option. Yeah.
Thank you, Sree, for your presentation. I think the previous 2 questions sort of alluded to this, but what's the importance of scale and location to developing a viable model that informs management?
I think definitely foundation of that would be just data. We have the data sets for a lot of these coastal locations. And I think building this model for other beaches and other cities is definitely the next step. So that's something that needs to be done. Did that answer your question? A little bit.